SEC This Morning, Peter Burns, the governor, Chris Doering. As always, follow us on Twitter at Chris Doering, myself at Peter Burns ESPN, and you can tweet the show using the hashtag SEC This Morning. You can tweet this guy at Mr. CFB. He's Tony Barnhart joining us. And Tony, let's start with the Iron Bowl. As crazy as it was, I don't know if you can. Sports is just crazier than fiction, right? I mean, what ultimately did you take from what happened there at Jordan-Hare?
Historic. I mean, there's no other word to describe what we saw in that Iron Bowl. The 2 pick sixes, the incredible plays made on both ends of the field, and the game basically ends because Alabama's got 12 guys on the field, which is something apparently Gus Malzahn had in his hip pocket for several weeks. It was just incredibly wild, and this game never fails to deliver, and it gave us another great chapter on Saturday.
Tony, despite the great games that we had a chance to watch, I think the story we come away with after this weekend are the coaching firings. Maybe some that were surprised that weren't made and some that were surprised that were made. What do you make of it all at the end of the day? And any that caught you off guard?
The one that surprised me the most was Matt Luke at Ole Miss, because I thought – they're close to winning that game, except for a very unfortunate situation. Maybe they win that game in overtime. Maybe they don't. But I thought they had gotten on a nice little run there with John Rice Plumlee at quarterback and Rich Rodriguez calling the offensive plays and Mike McIntyre there on defense. But I got some notes from my Ole Miss people when I expressed that opinion, saying, look, attendance was down and we just had to stop the bleeding. So I understand it, but that was the one that caught me the most by surprise.
I think you make a good point, Tony, though. The fact that they had brought in former head coaches to be coordinators on each side of the ball with Mike McIntyre, the defense was markedly improved. The offense under Rich Rodriguez had found a way to feature one of their best assets in John Rice Plumlee. Seemed like a lot of positives. I mean, you mentioned that Egg Bowl, it was a close game there. They had a one-possession game with a chance to win in Jordan-Hare. I mean, there was a lot of near misses. It was a confusing kind of timing of the whole thing taking place and the way it was delivered. Anybody in mind? I mean, is the way that happened signal that they had somebody ready to go that you think may fill in a perfect fit?
The only thing that makes sense is you drive just down the road to get Mike Norvell in Memphis. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, that why you would make this move this quickly unless you had that in mind. Now, Mike Norvell's done a great job at Memphis. They've still got an outside shot to maybe get into the Cotton Bowl as that group of 6 team. And so that would make the most sense to me.
And when you look at this, is this the new reality, Tony? And we saw Chad Morris out after 2 years, and we're seeing coaches, these attendance numbers are a little bit down. Is this new reality where it has to be microwavable success?
Well, listen, I talked to an athletic director, actually several athletic directors, about this issue. Says, look, if you know you're going to make a change, if you get to October, November, and you know you're going to make a change and make it now. Because the recruiting calendar, guys, has changed everything. The fact that you've got the early signing period in December now, you have got to get moving to either salvage your recruiting class and get your new staff out there if you can. But yeah, you talk about microwavable success. When I started in the business 800 years ago, a coach was going to get 5 years, no questions. Then that became 3. Now it's 2, and if it doesn't go well, it may be 1.5. It has changed a lot.
Tony, you know what was microwavable success? LSU's offense. And they'll get ready to play against Georgia and that great defense on Saturday in Atlanta. But let's take a look back at what has been able to be accomplished through 12 games for LSU as a whole and for Joe Burrow. What do you make of his transformation from being a guy last year that maybe managed the run game well and did a few nice things offensively to being one of the best quarterbacks and one of the greatest seasons in SEC history?
You know, CD, what's interesting about that, a bunch of us writers were on a conference call with Kirby Smart and Ed Orgeron yesterday, and Coach O said, look, the reality is last year we were about to mid-season before everybody, including Joe Burrow, got comfortable with what we were doing. All right, so it took some time. And then, to give Coach Orgeron a lot of credit, he realized he needed to do something pretty radical to take advantage of the skill set that Joe Burrow obviously had. What Joe Burrow has done is historic. Just look at the numbers. and he's done it again, and now he's got his team on the brink of winning an SEC championship and going to the college football playoffs. And I like to, some people said, don't give him the Heisman Trophy just yet. Well, good morning, boys.
Yeah.
I'm giving him the Heisman Trophy today.
Yeah, and if that's the case, it's the second Heisman Trophy winner in Baton Rouge. Of course, you had the Billy Cannon winning it way back in the day, and now Joe Burrow, who probably will get a statue outside of Tiger Stadium. And it sets up a great matchup in the SEC championship game. You're sitting there in Athens, Georgia. Georgia gets by 52-7 on Georgia Tech because of their defense. How much of the concern, again, with this offense leading into the SEC championship game?
Well, I think frankly, it rests on the shoulder of DeAndre Swift.
Yeah.
Because of, Kirby Smart told us yesterday that he's had a contusion. There's been no change. They expect him to play. Well, if they expect him to play, if he can go full speed and not be slowed by that shoulder, I think it's very significant. Guys, look. This game, we talk about this, that styles make fights. LSU plays one style, Georgia plays one style. If you can dictate the tempo of your style, you got a chance to win the game. Guys, I'm going to further simplify it for you. It's this. If Georgia can keep the game in the 20s, they've got a chance to win. If the game gets into the 30s, I don't think Georgia can win that game.
LSU usually gets into the 20s in the first quarter, so it's going to be a difficult task for that Georgia defense. Certainly they're up for it given what they've been able to do during the SEC season. But I look at this offense. This is the fourth straight game for Jake Fromm where he's thrown for less than 50% completion percentage, having a hard time finding some sort of rhythm with his receivers. I'm curious as to the Jim Chaney factor with him not being there. How much has that led to the regression this season? But I watched an LSU defense that was much maligned on Saturday night go out and play their best game after criticism from Rod Mullins and that College Football Playoff Committee. Any chance that we're set to see the best outing for Georgia's offense, maybe on the biggest stage?
Well, I certainly think that's possible, particularly if Swift is ready to go, because that sets up his ability to run the football, and those guys makes him in a better position to throw. All right, he still misses Lawrence Cager. Talking about Jake Fromm, he still misses Lawrence Cager. Lawrence Cager was his security blanket. He was the guy, the go-to guy when he needed a big catch. Obviously, Cager is not going to play, and Pickens is not going to play the first half. So to me, it's going to. That's why I think Georgia has got to slow the game down, keep it in the 20s, because it takes a little bit of pressure off Fromm. And I think they can run the ball on LSU, and that's going to be the key.
Yeah, Tony Barnhart joining us here on SEC This Morning. And, Tony, I want to go back to the Iron Bowl and specifically Nick Saban and this team. There's going to be a million different articles written about the dynasty is slowly dying. Feinbaum's already tweeted about it saying, hey, I'm not sure it's dead, but it's kind of starting to lean that way. What do you make of an undisciplined team and the way this team showed up this year?
Well, two things. Number one, I think it's a little premature to say we're nearing the end of the Saban dynasty. By my count, they've ranked number one in 4 out of their last 5 recruiting classes. Now, there is no doubt that this team, once they lost Dylan Moses, the great linebacker, it became clear that Alabama's defense was going to be a liability and not an asset. And that has been a big, big part of this. And so the undisciplined part, I think, is very important. 13 penalties, guys, 13. And that is not what we're used to seeing from Alabama. Now, the people I talked to said Nick had been talking about this all year, the fact that this team made a lot of mistakes and there was a lot of things to clean up. So when you put it all together, Auburn wins the game, but I think it's a little early to pronounce that this is the end of the Saban dynasty.
Tony, this is a season where the SEC is not going to fill their allotment of bowl tie-ins. That's going to cost the conference a pretty good amount of money, some of those teams specifically for missing the bowl games. Remember a few years ago when the commissioner and the SEC offices made an emphasis to improve what was going on in their basketball, and all of a sudden we had 8 teams getting bids into the NCAA tournament. Anything that they can do in terms of scheduling or what they can try to accomplish so that this doesn't happen again? I mean, I think you look at the out-of-conference losses, some very bad ones there, some teams beating up within one another in the conference. I mean, is this a problem that needs to be looked at going forward? Or is this just a one-off season that is an aberration?
I really think it's a one-off season because, guys, we talked about this, that there were like 5 really good teams in the SEC, and the gap to the next level was pretty significant. But when you sit around and look at these teams, I think Kentucky came back and had a nice year. Tennessee came back and had a nice year. Other teams like Mississippi State probably should have been better. But no, I certainly don't think you can change the scheduling mode. If anything, the schedules moving forward, the non-conference schedules moving forward are going to get tougher, not easier. So the bottom half of the league has got to play a little bit better, but it's not going to come through scheduling. I can promise you that.
Last question for you, Tony. When you look at LSU right now, if they do beat Georgia, do you think that they have done enough to reclaim the overall #1 seed of the college football playoff, which, of course, would be huge because that means you probably wouldn't have to face Clemson, who looks strong right now at the #3?
It's going to be really close. It's going to be really close because Ohio State has been very, very impressive. You hear the word most complete team. They play a Wisconsin team that's kind of hard to match up with, and so we'll see how that turns out. I believe, listen, I've still got LSU #1 in my poll, the one that I vote on, because I just think they are an absolute dynamite offense, and the defense is getting better. Take this into account, guys. Yesterday, Coach O said, we played really good defense against Texas A&M, and our best defensive games are in front of us.
And that's impressive, too, because Derek Stingley is getting a little bit better, but more importantly, Grant Delpit getting healthy. I think that was a huge play, and the reason why Kellen Mond went 10 of 30 and threw 3 picks. Tony, we'll see you in your hometown. We'll see you in Atlanta here coming up this weekend.
All right, guys. See you in Atlanta.
There it is, Mr. College Football, Tony Barnhart. All right, we're going to get to some of your tweets. Also, we're going to do